Hello, everybody. My name is Bart Vargas, and I have been asked to be part of the Lit Fest this year, and I'm going to do a little bit of a drawing workshop. I'm centering it around a project I already do on a daily basis that I just sort of called my daily drawings. And so I'll explain a little bit about my daily drawings, but also, like, as I draw, I'll explain my philosophy of drawing and like the ideas that I the ideas or the process I do when I make images. Um, so I think I'll just get started and kind of talk as I go along. Now, I'm not very good at doing two things at once, as my wife can testify. Um, and so I'm going to try to do my best of drawing and explaining at the same time. So if we could share screens, let's see if I think we got this set up right. Uh, I'll get started. Um, The daily drawings I do, this is going to be like the 383rd day that I've done a drawing that I post on social media every day. Um, uh, I I started this as an Inktober assignment I'd say 3 Octobers ago. I had my students do an Inktober assignment where we made books uh, and I had them draw a complete drawing about this size. I'm drawing on drawing paper and I've just quartered the page. But I have them do like a 4x6 drawing every single day for 31 days of October. And uh, it is harder to talk and draw at the same time. But I got a lot of groaning from the students for having to draw um, 30, 31 drawings. And so the next year for Inktober, well, because they complained, I decided I was going to do it with them. And so every class we met, we'd do our Inktober drawing, but on our days that we didn't meet, they'd have to do it on their own. And we filled these little books and eventually made sort of a zine that everybody got. Uh, the next year for Inktober, I did the same thing. But then after the second year of Inktober with my students, I decided I was just going to keep drawing. And um, so, starting November 1st, I just kept going. And now it's been 383 days. The reason I draw every day is because, or part of my reasoning for doing it is when I talk to people about how they draw, a lot of people tell me that they can't. And when it comes down to it, most people who tell you that they can't draw, they really just mean they don't like the way they draw. And I know as an artist and an image and object maker, the only way I'm going to get better at drawing is if I actually do it. And the more I draw, the better I will get. Um, and so I've drawn every day. And in the beginning with these drawings, I really didn't have a purpose. Like I was really just filling the page. I'm a really big about having the students fill the entire picture plane of their imagery. Um, and so I tell them they can draw anything they want, pattern, um, whatever they're interested in, so forth. Uh, but what mine has sort of evolved into is uh, uh, they've sort of become drawn. And by drawing every day, like it reinforces your style. You find things that you like, things that work for you, things that you're going to repeat. Uh, I've gotten a lot of praise for these drawings. Like I post them on like 10 different Facebook pages and Instagram and Twitter on a daily basis. And I even have a Patreon page which supports them. But I've developed a bit of a following on those pages. Some people are fans, some people not so much, depending on the things I say. But the formula I've sort of come up with is usually I take two separate images and combine them. Like today I'm combining an image of the Joslyns where it's George and Sarah. I'm drawing Sarah, and then I'm using Joslyn Castle as sort of her head. Um, and so those are the two images I've decided to combine today. Um, And uh, I usually also add like a bit of text. It's usually a quote that's taken out of context. Um, and it can be from anything. Sometimes it can be from my daily conversations with my friends and family and coworkers. It could be song lyrics. It could be from podcasts. Um, it could be basically, it could be from an NPR show. And by having this surreal image of one image combined with another, I try to say something that's humorous, thoughtful, ambiguous. Um, Sometimes I'm very deliberate with what I try to say, talking about the current situations we're facing, whether it be with the pandemic or racial and civil unrest to politics and the election. Um, and that's usually where I find that I don't have some fans who are outspoken. Um, but I but I combine two images and then usually say something. And like, so like with the theme of the Lit Fest being close to home, I think I will have this character say close to home. And so kind of the theme of the whole Lit Fest. Now I'm doing this quickly and I'm doing it while I'm talking, so I'm a little bit distracted. But I'm going to try to fill this entire picture plane. Like with all my drawings, I fill it with these two images, something that said, and then in the background, I usually try to fill it with a pattern or maybe even a background from a photograph. Usually I'm looking at a screen, whether it be my phone or my computer. I think I'm going to give this a frame since the Joslyns were such big supporters of the Art Deco style and Art Deco artists. Art Deco was uh, it was a style that was popular before World War One. It came out of France, but it influenced architecture, design, art, interior design, so many different things. And I'm just going to do sort of a simple geometric pattern for the frame. Oops, I meant to come off the top there. And so I find by framing it, it kind of gives it like a more finished look. Like to me, these drawings aren't so amazing because they're so small, um, but um, but I try to make them as nice as possible. So trying to give it a finished look, and usually there was some sort of weaving done in Art Deco. So I'm going to put another line that kind of reinforces those first lines, and so I end up with like a series of 4 squares in the corners. For the background, uh, there's another institution in town named after the Joslyn, so I think I'll draw a set of stairs. And then so I'm kind of trying to imply the Joslyn Art Museum a little bit here. Granted, it's a little simplified. And so now I have kind of all the pieces. There's still this big blank space. I have my students fill the entire image because my philosophy about a drawing or a two-dimensional image of painting is that like you treat it like a window. You're trying to communicate something with this space. And when we look out our windows, we don't see like objects floating in the void. So many times I find most people, including myself, my students, will draw one thing dead smack in the center and then leave the rest of the page blank. And so it kind of looks like this floating thing in the void. And to me, the only place I've ever seen anything like that was maybe in the Matrix movies, in the training room, that they were in that sci-fi kind of environment. But when we look out the window, there's a sky, there's ground, there's the car, there's the house, there's the person, there's the thing. And so I try to have, my philosophy is to treat the entire image as that space. Um, a lot of the things that we try to draw can be complex and intimidating, and that's why I try to break things into parts, because in drawing, it's a lot easier to draw something complex. If you break it into simple parts, draw one thing that adds up to the next thing. I kind of think that's a good way of handling life in general, is when we get overwhelmed by something that we have to do in our adulthood, in our personal lives, or our careers. If you break it into small parts, usually you can do really hard things or complex things. And I apply that to my drawings. To fill this space in the background, I'm going to do some series of rays. So I'm going to imagine a spot and just kind of go from that spot out. And I have a really diverse practice. Like, I paint, I sculpt, I make prints, I do a lot of ceramics. But one thing that has reappeared, especially in my printmaking and painting and drawings, are rays. They're just part of my visual vocabulary. Uh, as human beings, we've been making rays since we were drawing on the caves. Like a lot of the tombs of the Egyptians have asterisks on the ceiling, which represent the night sky or stars that were twinkling. Now that I have like the skeleton of the drawing, I'm going to go in and define the parts. Usually what I do is I put a thick line around everything. I kind of reinforce the letters, make them pop a little more. And so the parts don't all run together. I'm going to put a thick outline around the rest of the parts. It's going to make it look a little bit more cartoony. In my drawing classes, I have my students draw mostly with pencil, and which is graphite, charcoal, which is charred wood. We use Conte crayon, which is a clay-based media, but for their drawings, those past two Inktober assignments, or from the last 2 years, have evolved where I have my students draw a small ink drawing every single day. Like, they only have to be 20 minutes of drawing, but they have to fill it with ink. And I have them draw with ink because with ink, you have to make a commitment. Like, you have to make a mark and then move on. You can't erase ink. And so the reason I do this is because, like, some people love their eraser way too much. I know when I was younger, I was guilty of it. You'll make a mark and it's not perfect. And so you erase it, try to make another mark, and that's not perfect, and you erase it. And where other people are building an image, some people just have erasing marks. And when I ask people why they erase so much, and they tell me they're a perfectionist, and I'm like, well, perfectionists, in my experience, the perfectionists I've met in life don't get a lot done because they keep erasing. And so having people draw with ink, or having my students draw with ink, and having myself draw with ink, was my way of taking away that eraser and just getting comfortable with making mistakes. We can learn a lot from our mistakes. When we draw something and there's something about it we don't like, we can ask ourselves what it is that we don't like. And we can, if we pay attention, we can learn not to do that again. And so if we're eliminating the behaviors and images that we don't like, it'll push us toward what we do like. It'll make us try other strategies. It will, eventually you'll develop a style. And that's kind of what these simple drawings that I do every day do, like this thick outline, these amalgamation of images. Some people have really praised them and tell me how smart they are. Well, basically it's just a sort of a system I've worked out. um, that I've developed over the last 383 days. Um, when I look back at the first probably 100 or so, some of them are real doozies that I probably should take off of social media. But they've kind of become this thing. And so let's see. Now, are we having people or is everybody's microphone muted?
It's up to you. If people want to raise their hand or unmute themselves,
if people want to unmute themselves and ask questions, feel free to do so. Because I kind of feel like I'm rambling a little bit at this point. I think the next thing I would do, I'm gonna thicken up this background or this frame. I kind of feel like I'm rushing, so if this image doesn't quite look, if it looks a little crude, it's because I was rushing. After I get this background, I'm going to go through and I'm going to add detail to all the parts. And the detail I'm going to add has a lot to do with just value and texture. When we work with black and white media, whether it be pencil or graphite, Conte crayon, those things don't have color. They're neutral. You know, they're charcoal, they're grays, they're browns. And that's not the world that we experience. And so I have my students treat value, like the lights and darks of things, as like it's like the surrogate of color. Like, and when we have our drawing, how we fill it, we use value as color. We treat value like color. And the system that I've broken down with these daily drawings is sort of like hatching. Like I break it, the four kind of colors that or the four values that I color my drawings with are either the white of the paper, a solid black, or either a hatching, and then even cross hatching, like hatching over it. So I'm gonna look at her coat, and like she has these sort of, this part of her collar, which it was probably fur or something. It looks really dark in the image. It's mostly black, but there are a couple light spots. And so the light spots I'm going to separate into shapes, and then I'm going to color in those dark spots. And so, you know, the two colors I have on my page now are black and white, but I'm going to want grays in there too. And so I'm just going to hatch those and just like a series of parallel lines. Lots of students ask, like, how do you shade? And there's so many different strategies. And I use hatching. You know, some people blend, you know, really smooth gradations. But I tend to use hatching and cross hatching. You know, you can kind of play with the light and dark of hatching by like how close your lines are, how far away they are. I'm looking at like this part of her coat now and like trying to see where the darkest parts are. And I'm going to make some dark folds in there. But then there's some light parts to her coat as well. So I'm going to separate those out into shapes.
Bart, I had a question.
Okay.
Do your daily drawings feature your larger works very often, or?
Sometimes they have. My practice has slowed down in different ways. Like I used to do a lot of screen printing out at the Elkhorn campus, and some of my daily drawings have evolved into more developed, more complex images and screen prints. And in fact, one of the ones I was most proud of, probably within the first 30 days, I drew this man who had a heart for a head. And then it was kind of quirky. And so later down the road, I wanted to revisit it. So I drew another man with a heart for a head. and I didn't like that. And so I started playing with a more involved drawing as a side profile of a man, because I felt like the heart was a better profile than it was like a face.
Sure.
And so I had him kind of sitting like the thinker in a suit, and I put him like in a gold frame, and I made this like 8-color screen print. And I apply for shows all over the country and all over the world, and that screen print actually got curated into a show at the Highland Art Center in Chicago, and I hadn't shown in Chicago for 10 years, and so I was so proud of that print. And then you mail it off, and then the pandemic happened, and I got into a show that nobody went to, but it's on my resume. That and I'm really proud of that print. So sometimes these do evolve into other projects. These drawings are eventually, me and my wife are going to curate them into small little zines. We have over 300 of them now, and so we're kind of putting together the first one just in the beginning stages. Since so many of the drawings are so different and say different things, like some are involved with politics, some are just silly, some deal with social justice. We're going to try to curate them into little collections that make sense. I have a Patreon where I have about 15 supporters who buy, like they buy a drawing every single month, which has helped pay the rent during the pandemic. I've made prints of the drawings. Like I work with a professional printing house in town that'll make, the prints end up being nicer than the drawing sometimes, because they're, this is just ballpoint pen on just plain drawing paper, where the prints are a archival Glee clay inkjet print that it's guaranteed to be last for 100 years, and it's on heavy watercolor paper. And like when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, I drew a tribute to her, and a lot of people wanted a print of that, and so we made prints of those. The prints have been like this just started as a project to draw every day, a part of my practice, but I've been mailing prints all over the country. In fact, just this year during the pandemic, I've mailed prints to Australia, to the UK, to the United Arab Emirates, and that's like the power of social media. By joining some different groups, which I originally thought were sort of like craft groups that posted all kinds of art, like during the pandemic, just to sort of broaden my audience, I've joined a lot of these different groups I hadn't really thought of before, and I'm getting fans from all over the country with these drawings, selling the prints, sometimes the drawings themselves. And then going international was not quite what I expected with it. I guess at first I didn't take it as serious as it could be, and that's been a nice surprise. Essentially, I'm just filling in parts as I go, and so like drawing her might be intimidating to do all at once, but if I just do it in parts, it's a lot simpler. I would tell my students to go slower, and then the image wouldn't be as crude. But since we do have a bit of a time limit, I believe, like 45 minutes. So I'm going to try to complete this as much as we can.
About 22 minutes or so.
Cool.
To go.
I have a question.
Okay.
You kept saying hatching and cross hatching, and
Yes.
I can kind of maybe see what you meant, but could you tell us a little bit more what you like? What motion is hatching and what is cross hatching?
Well, hatching is simply just these parallel lines I'm sort of shading in with, and then cross hatching, like these parallel lines, and then cross hatching is where I'm running another set of parallel lines perpendicular to those lines. And so that space ends up being a little bit darker than just a single layer of lines.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Um, Now the proportions of this castle might be a little off, so I apologize to the architects and probably the photographer, but I hope it communicates Joslyn Castle by the time I'm done. So Sarah now is Joslyn Castle, and she's saying close to home in tribute to the Lit Fest. I'm just sort of reinforcing some of these lines. Like this first entryway is sort of squarish, blocky. There's, in art, I don't feel like there's a lot of rules. As a teacher, as an instructor of art, and as a creative teacher, I feel like no, I try to limit my no's. But since I do teach foundational classes, and one of them is elementary drawing, which is an observation-based course, I do really stress sort of the traditions, sight measuring, value shading, positive, negative space. I really push this concept of a complete image filling the entire page. Ultimately, when students graduate and become, or with their own art, with their own design, when they go out to their own careers, they can make their own set of rules, and they don't need to follow mine or the rules of my class. And so what you're seeing today in this demonstration is just kind of what I do with my own practice. So these are just suggestions, these are just strategies. They're not the only way to do things. There's a lot of other artists I like, and the reason I like them is because they're doing work that's nothing like mine. And sometimes in mediums I've never used, sometimes images I've never thought of. And I really enjoy seeing work that isn't mine, because I spend every single day with my artwork, and I'm glad people enjoy it, and I'm glad I'm able to make a living with it. But because I spend so much time with it, I know it's only one way of doing things. So that's why I'm a big fan of art myself.
Speaking of your images, where do you go? Here it looks like you've used, several different sources that we can see, but how do you find your images normally?
Like for today, I just used Google search, just regular search engine, go to images. A lot of times I follow probably over 2,000 accounts on Instagram, other artists, lots of different science stuff, lots of different animal pages. My wife really loves turtles, and so I follow a bunch of turtle pages so I can send her different links and videos of nature things. But sometimes in there I see different animals, prehistoric animals. And so a lot of the drawings are like a person's body with an animal head. For the human bodies, sometimes I have access to a lot of magazines through my wife's work too. They read a lot of printed materials to the blind community. And so when they're done with the printed materials, I raid their recycle bins and I go through magazine advertisements and magazine articles. I take bodies from there. Social media, like people's Instagram accounts, people's Facebook accounts. Like some of these art groups I'm in, like sometimes I just save people's profile picture, and then I draw their profile picture and then have an animal say something kind of weird. And I actually made a friend in Tennessee who was, she figured out that one of my drawings was actually her, or her friends did. And then they asked if it was this person, and I was like, well, yeah, you became this sunflower person, like, and it ended up being like this talking flower. And so now we're friends on Facebook, and I get to see their art. And so the images can kind of come from anywhere. Me and my wife walk around the neighborhood in Little Bohemia quite a bit, and so sometimes I draw stuff that's from the neighborhood. She's a photographer, so every day she's taking photographs of different compositions that are either in the street or in our neighborhood. And by watching her photograph like everyday things, every now and then I will photograph everyday things and use that as source material. One of the more popular drawings that I posted was, it was just a picnic table at the ethnic sandwich shop, and it's just an old table that's had, you know, a lot of years of love and years of patrons eating at it. And so I photographed it, and then one day when I couldn't think of what to draw, I was like, well, I'll just draw the picnic table. And I collect all these quotes from, you know, from social media, from song lyrics, from people's conversations, from podcasts and so forth. And I just went through the quotes, and I found a quote about joining a cult, which was just really ridiculous. And so I had the picnic table try to recruit for a cult. And for some people, it was just like, a lot of people online wanted to know what it meant, and it really didn't mean anything. But it was just so ridiculous. A lot of people thought it was funny and liked it, shared it, and some people bought the prints of it. And it was just something I did that day. Like, I never thought I would be drawing picnic tables that were cult leaders. But somehow it worked. And that's another part of these drawings. By combining two images and adding an out of context quote, I end up with drawings that I never expected. So they're a little bit of a random generator. I just use the Notes app on my phone to save these quotes, and like, I copied and pasted it into Word a little while back just to see how much was there, and it was like over 14 pages of quotes. And so I got a lot to mine. There's probably some I'll never use, but I don't know, they're there when the next picnic table shows up, so to speak. You know, I'm really honored to be drawing for LitFest. I hope some of the advice I've given about making a complete picture, breaking it into parts, thinking of value as color to shade, I hope that helps some people in their own practice. But without LitFest, I don't know if I would ever have drawn Sarah Joslyn's body, or Joslyn Castle, or hint at the Joslyn. One great thing about drawing, like sometimes especially with students, they'll get to a certain point in their drawing where they really like it, and I try to push them to finish it by putting in a background or something like that. And they say they're not going to do it because they're worried they're going to ruin the drawing. The beautiful thing about drawing is that if you do ruin your drawing, you can always draw another drawing. And so it's not the end of the world. Like, to me, this drawing is out of proportion. Like, if I took my time and went slower, I'd probably do things differently. I wouldn't have smeared this ray over here, so to speak. In all honesty, I was nervous about this workshop. I was kind of treating it like a kitchen show or a cooking show in my living room. And so why I've been drawing this, I've been looking at one of the 5 drawings I drew this morning, because this is the 6th time I've drawn this drawing today. And so yeah, it's based off of like photographs from, I think one of these might actually be from the Joslyn Castle website. But it's just Google searches of Joslyn Castle and the Joslyns as a couple. Like I Googled search Art Deco and found like the simplest sort of simple geometric frame to sort of incorporate. Out of the 5 drawings I did earlier, I liked this one the most. But even drawing the Art Deco frame, I see mistakes I made that I really didn't like. I number each drawing, I date each drawing. Like with one good thing about this project is I look back at like the first 100 drawings or so, and they really didn't have a focus or a goal. It wasn't until around 100 that they became these things where, you know, these amalgamations that say things. But I never threw away any of those drawings, because like looking back, I can see the growth. I can see how this sort of style developed, where I abandoned this one way of doing things, how I started doing something consistently. I tell my students to save all their drawings and date them, because sometimes we go through like an 11-week quarter and students are really frustrated with how they draw. They say they didn't learn anything. But one trick to that I do is like on the very first day of class, I have them draw. I give them a dollar store mirror and I have them do a self-portrait, and they draw that self-portrait. And then I have them turn it in and I take it away from them. And then one of the final assignments I have them draw is after they've done 10 weeks of, you know, staggered techniques that built off the one before it. One of their, you know, they spend like a couple weeks on a self-portrait, and they put it up and they don't like it and they didn't learn anything that quarter and they don't like the way they draw. Well, then I bust out that small self-portrait from the first day and I put it right next to the other one. And then a lot of them are like, oh my God, I can draw. And it's because they can see the growth. And that's why I tell people to save their drawings. Because like I had this one student, he's a graphic designer now. He would do just amazing exercises in class. And then at the end of class, he would wad them up and throw them in the trash can. And I was like, don't wad them up. I can use those as examples for the next class. And, but I think we can learn a lot by saving our work and looking at, I imagine it a little bit like journaling, how when you go back and you read about something from a few years ago and you realize you're in a totally different mental place than you were before. Drawing is a form of communication and documenting time, and you can have a similar experience with your drawings. Yeah. I think I covered most of my notes on this. Like all my degrees are in sculpture. Most of my gallery representation is in painting. I do screen printing and ceramics. And one thing with this pandemic, like drawing has sort of become part of my income now, which I never expected. Up until now, I've just treated it as a tool where now it's going to be a zine. It's probably going to have its own website. And I'm mailing them across the world in the country. And so, it's a really democratic art. Like I feel as long as you have paper and something to make marks with, you can do this. You don't need an elaborate studio. I'm just doing something really small and manageable. So like this project doesn't take a lot of my day. In the beginning, it was just 20 minutes. And some of those drawings were really crude. Now I give each one maybe an hour. But I probably did this in maybe a half hour or 40 minutes. And so, yeah, drawing, to me, this is fun. It's still work. It does have its frustrations, but I encourage people to draw, especially my students. Does anyone from the audience have any questions before we go today?
There's a question in the chat.
Let's see.
Let me find it here.
Let's,
Wait, here it is. Chat.
let's see.
You see it?
Let's see. I think it's from Caitlin. I don't want to interrupt. Bart, train of thought. But I have a couple questions. What printing business do you use in Omaha to print your drawings? I go through Hamilton Color Lab. There's a lot of choices to print in town. I had a pre-existing relationship with Hamilton Color Lab. My wife is a photographer, and they do. I think they treat her work. They specialize in photographic printing, and so I feel like they treat her photographs with a lot of respect, how they color correct and do their archival printing. And since I already had a relationship with them, I'm just having them print the drawings on the same type of watercolor paper my wife prints her photographs on. And so it's a local business too. I'm really big about supporting local when I can. And so that's where I have my prints made. The next question is, how would you suggest I approach trying to draw less details for simple everyday sketches? For example, I would have tried to draw all the details in the coat and the building, which ends up taking a lot of time, but you were able to get enough detail in your drawing without doing that. Do you set a time limit for your daily drawings? Yeah, an hour is about the most I try to spend with my drawings. Like I teach, I have a studio with other projects that have commitments. I'm married. I sleep, I eat. I try to just give up an hour to give an hour to the drawings. A lot of like filling in the details, I reduced it to what was the darkest spot, what was the lightest spot. Leave the lightest spots blank. Instead of drawing every single brick in the Joslyn or every single brick in the castle, I just made some parts shadow with the hatching, and then I made a few horizontal lines, and then every now and then I'll put a perpendicular line just to suggest bricks. If you're just doing sketches, like I always suggest capturing the shape, and then kind of like the parts. Like I reduced her coat to like just this sort of vertical kind of flowing shape, and then like her dress underneath her coat, and then slowly moved across the page, just essentially drawing shapes that sort of built her form or her torso. Then I went in and did the detail. So it was kind of like shape, light and dark, and then details. And so that'd probably be my biggest suggestion for this sketch. Like if this was something I was going to develop into a screen print, I would literally think about what colors these things would be, and then I'd have to get out my light table, and it would actually have to be, every color would have to be a separate drawing, and I'd have to think about how colors would overlap, how they would sort of puzzle piece next to each other. It gets a little bit more complicated. I know we live in this digital age, and a lot of my peers still say I'm quite the caveman because I'm more about doing things with my hands. And so where they'll go into Photoshop and separate layers of an image out, I'll go to the light table and I'll draw 8 different drawings, and it takes me a lot longer, but I'm, excuse the bad language, but I've been called a process whore. Like I like making art. I like making things. And so, and then I'll have a student show me how they can do it in Photoshop in 20 minutes. And I'm just like, wow, well, you got some mad skills, and I learn how to do that a little bit. And but for my images, I kind of make them, I'm 47. Like I know I'm set in my ways a little bit, but we all make art differently, and making our art is what teaches us how to make our art.
Cool.
How are we on time?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. It's 1:45. So
Oh, that was right on time. I want to thank everyone for listening to me today, and everyone who signed into Zoom. I want to thank everyone at the Lit Fest, everyone at Joslyn Castle, everyone at Metro Community College. It's like there's so much talent in Omaha. For you guys to ask me to be part of the Lit Fest, this is quite an honor for me. So I just want you to know I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.